All right, here we go.
You ready for this?
At last hurrah. I got Dick Hirsch, it's John Reed.
Yo, yo, yo.
Sapphire / ASUG annual conference in the books.
2017.
Indeed. And this is our Friday morning tradition. Unfortunately, we're not poolside this time.
Next year. Next year.
And usually we grab a deserted, abandoned room. This time we've grabbed a room that looks like it's about ready for action.
Right.
There's like refreshments out and stuff. So
we're not going to take any.
Yeah. So listeners, if you hear some like disruption in the middle of this, it'll be us getting kicked out of this nice room. So
we'll see what happens.
Yeah. We've already had a little chat with security. So.
Right.
All right. So anyhow, those of you who follow our stuff probably know that we have a ton of videos already up from Diginomica, something close to 20. We got a ton of articles. And I kind of want to start there because right before the conference, you did some trademark sleuth work.
Hell yeah.
I like to call it Encyclopedia Browning, but you're more a Sherlockian, so you like the Sherlock. It's gotta
be fun.
Sherlock Holmes. But anyway, you wrote a piece on the multi-cloud, and you kind of made also sort of some predictions of sorts based on that, and you pulled together information from a variety of sources, and it turned out that SAP paid a lot of attention to that and they were surprised by a lot of stuff in there. So we kind of entered the week with a lot of kind of hype on the SAP side, trying to track you down and talk with you and also just see the keynotes. So how did everything stack up?
I mean, before the event, I started seeing clues, and I saw some evidence that there was going to be an important change regarding how the SAP Cloud Platform, the SAP PaaS, responds to the challenge of different infrastructure providers. And I found some job offers, as always, showing evidence that SAP was working on this. And then I found some help pages, and they sort of had the proof in the pudding that they were making the announcement. And then at the keynote, we saw some words from Bernd that SAP is now offering beta Cloud Foundry on Azure and as well on AWS, which is excellent news.
Right. And you had mentioned in your blog post some speculation around AWS. Turns out job orders are sort of a leading indicator of what a company is up to, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, this is for me always sort of because they have to have job offers with enough description that people are interested, and there's always enough meat in there that you can sort of make assumptions based on that in terms of what the strategy is for SAP. So it's good for me. I don't know whether it's good for them, but it makes good reading. Right.
And actually in Bernd Leichert's keynote on the first day, there was a fair amount of emphasis on sort of openness to sort of frame these announcements. Right.
Well, I mean, I think SAP is realizing that the infrastructure as itself is or will be soon a commodity. Mm-hmm. Okay. And customers want this. Customers already have experience in these other providers. And so they don't want to be, I don't want to say stuck, but I say they just want to have the opportunity to move to these other providers. And SAP is doing a really good job exploiting Cloud Foundry and the potential in that platform to be able to support the customers who have these requirements.
So what is your reaction to the announcements? In particular, Cloud Foundry that announcement didn't get a lot of attention in the keynotes.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of Sapphire Now people wouldn't really understand that unless they went into more detail.
Right. I mean, the one thing that I think there's like one comment on it was that it's now GA, which means that the support for Cloud Foundry within the cloud platform it's readily available. The Azure is now the Azure support is now in beta, but the general support within the SAP environment, that is now there and people can use it in a productive setting, which is good.
So what do you think of those announcements?
I mean, they're excellent. I mean, because like I said, this provides users or developers the ability to really take their code and develop it using Cloud Foundry, and then they can move to other platforms with a limited amount of problems. Of course, developers have to be careful, and this is one thing that we see as you start moving to other Azure, then there's a tendency to maybe use the business services which are in Azure or the ones which are in the Cloud and the GCP. And of course, once you do that, then you lose the ability to jump to other environments. So it's just a difficult situation that developers just have to be aware that there's also restrictions in terms of this multi-cloud functionality.
Right. And it also opens up pathways for more external developer engagement.
Of course.
For non-SAP developers.
Of course.
Because you can now say, hey, you're used to using this open source platform. So
right. And I mean, and there are two paths. The one is the Cloud Foundry based development, and the other one is the Neo. And the Neo is the traditional platform for the SAP, which has been there for years and years. And developers, of course, have to be aware, and partners as well, when they're developing, what are my goals? What do I want to achieve with this code? And I think that's something that they have to look at when they decide which way that they want to go.
I like the challenge for SAP to throw down on itself to sort of do the combo route of pursuing open source and interoperability, multi-cloud, as you put it, but also embrace the challenge of making their platform robust enough with their own business services that at least an SAP-focused developer would say, hey, you got a ton of services here that will help me, whether it's mobility services and extensions or perhaps UI, Fiori type stuff, like build it all in there in a way that works well for SAP developers. So it seems to me that's what they're doing right now, and that I think they should take that challenge upon themselves, not just to say, oh, open source is going to kick our ass, so the heck with our proprietary, but like make the proprietary really friggin' good for those who are serious about building. I don't know what you think, but that's kind of my view.
I mean, that's always a choice that SAP has to make. I mean, if they want to have the people stay on their platform and not go to another infrastructure provider then, or like stay with Neo, then of course it has to be interesting enough for the people to take that path. And I mean, what's also important to say is that SAP isn't the only one, or the only product that's looking at this. I mean, you can look at like S4HANA. There are two options there. I mean, there's already customers. In fact, I interviewed a customer, one of the first ones, who has S4HANA on the GCP, so on the Google Cloud Platform. So that's, and I mean, I
think I talked with them also.
Yeah, and so there's also people who are doing on AWS, so that's already happening. And as well, we're going to see at some point in the future, we're going to see that SAP provides this functionality as well. But it's basically, if you look at how S4HANA Cloud moves into the multi-cloud strategy, is that you will have the ability, for example, to have S4HANA Cloud host or then maintained or operated by SAP running on another infrastructure provider. Now, we have to make sure that it's clear that this isn't the on-premise S4.
Right.
This is the S4HANA Cloud, which means that there are restrictions and you can't do everything that you could do on the on-premise version. But that's why you have a distinction between what is available in the HANA Enterprise Cloud, which is more the on-premise version.
You can customize the hell out of it.
Right.
You could argue that it's somewhat lift and shift in that regard.
Right. And so they deal with the offer from, which is coming at some point, I don't know when, is from the S4HANA Cloud, is that infrastructure isn't as important as it once was.
Which was a nugget you picked up from a couple of run-ins with Sven Deniken this week, who I didn't happen to get a chance to talk to.
Yeah.
And in general, S4HANA Cloud kept a pretty low profile at this event in terms of how it was presented, because there was so much focus on Leonardo and other stuff.
I mean, I think what's in, and we can sort of use this as a segue into Leonardo. What's really important is it's still a core. Okay, and Leonardo is a box of technologies.
Right.
But without the business context, there's no value, or there's a lot less value. And so you always have to sort of combine blockchain with a business process, and that is, I think, the reason why.
But I would argue that the core, as it was largely presented on stage, was about the on-premise S4HANA version, not the cloud. There was not that much talk about the S4HANA cloud, and the reason is that it's not ready for most of these customers to move to. They can't do it. They're large enterprise customers, and the S4HANA cloud's not ready for them.
We're going to go there. Okay.
The folks that we talked with were more. The kind of S4HANA Cloud customers they're picking up now are more like service firms that are drinking their own Kool-Aid and also running. Now, some of them are fairly sizable, so they're not small companies.
Right.
So it's not a matter of scale. It's more a matter of the functionalities in the works. And so I think if I had to predict, I would say next year at this time, S4HANA Cloud is going to be a much bigger focus of the keynote. That's my view.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, for me, it's the idea that you need the business context, and it's less relevant what the size of the company involved is, rather than I can't have blockchain and without a business context, because that is a service that is provided by a variety of providers.
Yeah.
And so Leonardo was pushed a lot, but I think it's just more important to see it as a toolkit.
Right. Yep.
And that's why it's really important when you look at Leonardo to say, okay, it helps companies on the digital transformation journey.
Right.
But it has to be sort of anchored in their business processes. Otherwise, it has no relevance. It's just cool buzzwords without real impact in terms of what customers are providing.
Well, and that's what SAP is banking on as well, right? Because their biggest value proposition they can bring to Leonardo, which I refer to as a next-gen kitchen sink, where you can get everything from IoT to AI to blockchain. But their biggest value prop is tying that back into,
of course,
into a back end that's more than just APIs, right? But because now they do need to add more APIs. I heard that from a couple of customers, and I know they're working on that. In the API Business Hub, the API Business Hub will be much more substantial a year from now, say.
Right.
But SAP doesn't want to just be an API hub, right? They want to be perceived as, if not the digital core, at least a big part of the engine that drives those things. And that, I think, rather than like a focus on S/4HANA Cloud, I think the focus is more on, we want to be the engine to drive those transactions and those next generation sort of projects that you're going to be working on. And so as a result, they spent a lot of time trying to brand the Leonardo concept, because before the show, it was just an IoT venture, right?
Right. Sort of a weird shift. I mean, in the beginning of the year, then Leonardo was IoT, and then it sort of expanded, and there's no sort of understanding why that happened. I mean, but for me, one example of sort of how the pieces fit together is you look at the use of Copilot within S4.
Which is the digital assistant.
Which is sort of the bot.
Right.
Okay. And it combines sort of the machine learning aspects of Leonardo, although they didn't mention Leonardo, with sort of the business process coming from S4. And that's a real business value right there. And I think that's sort of an example, I mean, of how the pieces sort of fit together with sort of the Leonardo and the other applications as well.
So what were your reactions to how SAP presented that? Did people the people you talked with, did they kind of understand what SAP was getting at there? Or?
I think the more people you talk to, you get a better idea of it. But I think it's because we talk to executives who we could just batter them with questions saying, what about this, what about this? And now I have a much better understanding.
I've seen you do that before, actually.
And at the keynote, there were slides, and it really wasn't totally clear, but it was just talking to people like Bjorn Gerke and asking him, okay, how do the pieces fit together? Because I mean, SCP is an integral part of Leonardo, and I think that's where I started to see the value of the offering itself.
Right. So it's sort of like you have a sort of view of the shape of it, and now you're going to do your Dick Hirsch thing and start to flesh out what that all is going to look like.
Well, I mean, you got to understand how the pieces fit together, and I mean, and still right now it's still very early, and it's unclear, for example, how partners can really contribute. I mean, I think Deloitte is there; they are going to offer, I don't know, some sort of Leonardo services, but I think the question is, do you, as a partner, do you help customers on the Leonardo journey, or do you create your own Leonardo services? I mean, I think there's a variety of opportunities, and I think what's important as well is that it's not just the technology. There's also something on top of that as well.
Yeah, we could probably have a long conversation about just the service industry's disruption part of this,
right.
and we talked some with SAP about this week, and just sort of the awareness that a lot of their partners are going to have to change to keep up with this as well, and so that's a whole other piece of the puzzle.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, they already made, or they're making the same transition right now in terms of cloud.
Yeah, indeed. Right. It's really, it's a continuation, right?
Right. It's a never-ending story.
Becoming a cloud / digital consultancy or whatever that means. Which is not just about fancy tech. I think it's about engaging with customers differently, because it's much less about go live and walk away to the next, right?
Right.
It's more about kind of, longer term sort of partnerships, sprints and go lives and more adjustments and, less consultants on site, more virtual. I mean, there's a lot of changes.
Right. And I mean, I think what's also interesting is they're starting to see an emphasis, especially in terms of Leonardo, in terms of new apps.
Right.
I mean, I think that's something which in the past you had an application, field service, something else, and then it would be extended.
Hey, Dick, let's just stop for a sec. Hey, what's up? Yeah.
Of course.
Oh, no. We just grabbed an empty spot just real quick. Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
Service interruption.
Yeah.
We have to relocate. Let's do that.
Yeah, cool.
And it's Sean Reed back with Dick Hirsch.
Yeah, we made it.
We were just talking about disruption and we got disrupted.
Yep.
Now we are in a place where we can't be kicked out. I don't think 'cause we're in a hallway.
Yeah.
We have to be kicked out of the hotel. So far, so good. But anyway, when we left off, you were kind of talking about the apps part. And I think that's important because while sort of, platforms and openness are great, I'm really intrigued by apps. And some of the apps I saw this week that were kind of more vertically focused, industry focused,
right,
and sort of pain point focused were pretty amazing. I saw this really cool app, for example, that was, I don't know if you saw this one, that was money laundering detection.
I didn't see it, but I talked to the guy. That was interesting.
And super smart, right? And incorporating machine learning built on HANA into a very specific scenario. And the guy's doing really well, of course, because that's so much more appealing than just talking in generalities about what AI can do.
Right.
So did you see some interesting apps this week?
Well, I mean, the one that I liked is that we had a quick meeting with Helen Arnold, who is the head of the SAP Data Network. And I mean, I did a blog about them earlier, and today we got a chance to sit and talk to her and someone from her team, and we saw a demo of one of their apps for Fieldglass.
Right.
And it was cool because, I mean, basically, I mean, what Helen's team is doing is they're looking at data as a service, basically. And we saw an application which was integrated was using Fieldglass data, and it was going in and analyzing the data in the cloud application in an aggregated form, so that you could really get a better understanding in terms of where sort of the issues are in terms of regional differences, in terms of the data coming from the temporary workers, and that was really cool.
You could see comparisons of like what a going salary if you wanted to hire them perm, because they pulled in information from, I think, some of the public surveys on salary data, and then also you had the temp stats, and it was all aggregated in real time.
Right, and I mean, what was also really fascinating is that, I mean, when you have the ability to go into a SaaS application, you can have benchmarks, and so that was really fascinating for me, was that you could compare yourself as if you're a Fieldglass client to the benchmark of the industry itself, and that, I mean, it has great value because you can immediately see, for example, are you paying more, paying less, and that was good. Yeah,
the demo they were showing us, the person was paying 87% more or something, and that's that's not so good, but at least you have that gut check of like, wow, we're not in context, and to your point, that's sort of the data sort of driven or data inspired business model as a whole is, talking to a lot of companies that are talking to some S4 HANA companies that are trying to figure out how to move from manufacturing to services and data services. And this is sort of a constant preoccupation now.
Yeah. I mean, well, they're saying, data is going to be the new oil. And just because it's so valuable, and not only in terms of selling your own data, or monetizing your data, but also just using the data which you have to better understand your business. And it's data science again. That was one thing that was really fascinating at this event, is that I talked to a lot of people who did data science related activities. They either have an offering or they use data science, and it was a bit of a challenge because I'm not really a data scientist, but there's so much value in there which is sort of hidden, and if you have the domain knowledge, then you can pull out this data and sell it.
Right. And that was another standout thing for me this week that I just wanted to mention, just because if you're watching the keynotes, I don't think you got a lot of this, but I talked with, and we have some videos as well of several either HANA or S4 HANA customers that I sort of describe as mature customers, because they overcame sort of the challenges of getting onto the platform, and they also, some of the benefits of that, a lot of times, better integrations, instance consolidation, better performance. They moved beyond that and started looking into, well, hey, now that we're here, what can we do?
Right.
And a lot of times what's happening next is things like building mobile applications that connect directly with customers that take advantage of real-time data, for example, or In other cases, it might be something where a design thinking workshop. There was a German company that was looking at, we got to move into services, and they were a family-run company. And Dan was interviewing him, and he was really shocked to see this German company like talking about design thinking and services. And the guy said, I'm 100% confident that if we don't do this, another competitor is going to. Right. And I think that reflects very well on SAP's case that they're trying to make, that you can do all this stuff on HANA.
Right. And I mean, I think they have to just be aware that many of their customers might not really understand the potential of the information that they have. For example, I had saw one customer that is a plasma bank in Holland, and the value of the data that they're creating regarding blood, I mean, aggregate it and provide it to people. I mean, in a safe and secure fashion. And I think that's where SAP has the experience to really help these customers on this journey.
Yep, I agree.
Because that's sort of another type of the digital transformation, is that these companies have this information and they can present it, and they can have their data as a service. Right.
So the other chance that I think you had to spend some time with the SAP Hybris people, who they're super interesting in a couple different ways. First of all, because they're so aggressively customer facing, omni-channel, all that stuff, but also they've been so deeply embedded in microservices push and stuff like that. Did you learn some interesting stuff from them?
I mean, I've talked to them multiple times, and I get a really good feeling that they understand what the shift to microservices means. They understand it as an organizational level, at a portfolio level, and I think that's, I mean, you see all the keynotes, I mean, it's another buzzword. But when I talk to them, I get the feeling that they understand that it's not just an API. There's a lot of stuff which goes beyond that, and I think that's a good sign, because maybe they can help the other parts of SAP sort of on this journey. And they have cool stuff. I mean, I saw one demo, which is Charlie, which is sort of a bot based on Facebook Messenger, which was cool. It's basically a sort of a chat bot which goes against the Hybris microservices. And it really showed me the sort of the ability to very rapidly use these services to create something interesting. And you had the ability from Microsoft, from Facebook Messenger, to order stuff on a store.
I was debating with Holger Mueller whether Charlie was male or female. It's very important to Holger that Charlie be male, because he says there's too many female chatbots.
Okay.
But one of the interesting things about that, and including the microservices push, is that we don't think about this that much yet, but in China, for example, their dominant messaging environment, WeChat, is really e-commerce and everything for the people that use it. Like, everything happens as services within the messaging environment. Right. And you have to feel that's inevitable here too. It is starting to happen a little bit, as far as like you can, do an Uber summons within Facebook, but it's really more about these intelligent agents sort of, I guess you could say, butting in on conversations to say, hey, I see you guys are talking about blah. Should I book a table for 4 in this town that you mentioned for tonight? Or, that's sort of what's going on, I think. Yeah. But hopefully in a helpful way, right? And hopefully if it's designed well, people will feel like, hey, this is really useful and not annoying.
Right. And I mean, what's also interesting about Hybris is that I think they look at more than just sort of the technology involved in microservices. I mean, if you take a look at their revenue cloud, I mean, somehow, if you are a partner, for example, creating 30 microservices, how do you monetize that? How do you deal with the subscription model? And I think that's something which people really haven't taken a look at yet. They're focused on the developer, but what comes beyond that, that's just as important.
Yeah, I have in my podcast notes you wanted to talk about standardization versus configuration.
Right. I mean, I think that's... I talked to a lot of customers about this, and some of the people who were on like Hybris were saying, well, when we moved to like C4C, our business had to become aware that they couldn't do everything. Mm-hmm. And so that there was a standardization process.
Right.
Okay. And what happens when the business says, okay, this is something that I need. Okay. It's not provided by the standard. What do you do? And so either you can try and force SAP to expand the standard, or you extend it. And I think that's this is what I think you always say, is that the extensibility of these applications via the SCP is critical.
It is, because the thing is that I think a lot of SaaS companies in the early renditions of SaaS presented a false and unfair choice to customers, because a lot of that standardization is really healthy when it comes to like, oh, this regional office wanted the field over here, and this, that kind of crap, and you can't benefit from all the pieces of staying modern on one version if you. But there's another piece of standardization which is unhealthy, which is I have a competitive, differentiated process that I want to have out there in some form. And one of the things I think SAP in some ways can be perceived as being behind in some ways with SaaS, not in every way, but in some ways compared to some of the pure plays. But a lot of the pure plays don't have as much of the platform that SAP has. And so I'm always pushing SAP to stoke that advantage. And I was very encouraged to talk to S/4HANA Cloud customers this week. They were all building apps on the SAP Cloud platform, if name compliant. And I pushed them to tell me, like, was this hard, right? Try to get them to confess. And they said, no, it was not. And so that type of extensibility. But to your point, I think that's where the service provider thing comes in as well, because to make those decisions is very, very important. And like, what direction do you go in, right? Because do you push SAP to do the standard? Do you go for an extension, or does your partner build you an app, or maybe you get an app off the marketplace, which SAP has finally consolidated, which I kind of made fun of in one of a blog. But anyway, that's another story. But anyway, so I see a service provider in the new context being an advisor in that role, and saying, here's the best way to handle this issue, and ideally they know your industry well enough to say, you know what, I'm really going to push you to standardize on that because it's actually not that important, but here's what is, but I think you raise a really important point, and it's going to have to be figured out.
Yeah, and I think if you see the extensions, the types of extensions are always expanding as well. Yeah. SuccessFactors was the first one. I have S4. I think also the Ariba is out. I haven't seen the ones for Fieldglass yet, but I think that's where the power. But you have sort of the SaaS application, which is standardized, and then you have SCP as the extension platform. That's always sort of the one goal, which has been pushed.
We talked with the Fieldglass head a little bit about that yesterday. And one thing he said is that they have been so aggressively kind of pure SaaS in their approach that they have like API centric kind of stuff. So their APIs are really, really robust. But there was now this conversation happening around like, how could we incorporate this platform for that? So it's that balance, right? They're way ahead on the API side, but now look at the platform side. And I do think a lot of these cloud assets within SAP are talking to each other a fair amount about this stuff, and if they do, that's to SAP's benefit for sure.
And I think as we go forward, the question is going to be, how do you bring in like Leonardo? Do you bring it in? Because I think that's one thing, is that you bring it in perhaps to the application, like the Copilot example in S4, or you exploit it as a partner. So I think that's going to be curious to see what happens there.
So, did you notice anything else?
That was about it. I talked to a wide variety of customers, and they were just across the board interested to tell their story, and it was just sort of a challenge to bounce between these various customers. But that's how you sort of get pushed out of your comfort zone. And sometimes you can sort of tell customers, well, look here. I was talking to one guy from a blood bank in Holland. I said, use your data. And stuff like that is just interesting.
Yeah. Also, I noticed in a couple of meetings you were banging on a point around what SAP should do to support folks once apps are built. You have a bit of a mantra around application management.
That's definitely the case, because usually you have a focus which is on the developer. And you have the developers. It's sort of like, what happens after after your app is deployed, and after that the story sort of ends. There's some stuff there, but it's not really pushed as much as necessary. And it's also just in terms of the developer engagement team, they have to take an operations approach as well.
Yeah.
Because people have to be aware that it's more than just a development platform, because how do you go productive? How do you deal with monitoring? How do you deal with errors on your platform? How do you discover errors? Yeah. Things like that. Those things which happen once it goes live.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge then.
This conversation almost feels like a tech ed conversation, Dick. We're having it at Sapphire. What's going on, man?
Yeah, you're right. But
isn't that interesting? It's like business
we're tech guys, so
business and tech is like really intertwined at this point, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
Because we saw much more of a tech-focused keynote than you would expect to see at Sapphire as well.
Yeah, that's true.
They did trot out Derek Jeter and Kobe Bryant on the last day, but before that, they got their helping of SAP technology in.
Yeah, but Hasso also did a really good keynote, and I think he sort of brought it down to earth a little bit, which is always useful. Sort of, in the business audience, it might not even always be perfect, but I think he just provides a relevance and sort of a relaxed atmosphere, which is really sort of nice on a keynote.
I think it's interesting because there's been so much of a focus on IT needs to understand and collaborate with the business better, and that was a big theme in a lot of our customer videos. But the reverse is also true. Business has to understand this technology and what it's doing and why it matters, right? They need to be able to cross that line, and I think you saw a fair amount of that emphasis here, which is just kind of interesting, because in the past I can remember people telling me, don't talk about this at Sapphire, save that for tech ed and your geeky friends at tech ed. And this year you didn't really hear that so much. No. So and I think there was one other thing I wanted to ask you about, but now I'm spacing on it, so maybe we'll just have to call it a day. Listeners will notice we didn't get into the licensing stuff. That's not because we're in denial. It's just I've flogged that topic on multiple videos, and you can get your fill on Diginomic on that. We got a bunch of user group perspectives on it as well, and more articles to come on that. So if you feel like you wanted to dig into that, there's a lot of video and content on that already. So we just decided we'd try to give you more of a flavor of like assuming that stuff is sorted out. Here's what's possible and what SAP is doing. Just in terms of like your day job, you've been sort of pushing envelopes with cloud services and technology.
Yeah, and that's because in my day job I'm the product owner for our ServiceNow integration business, and that's one of the reasons why I push sort of looking beyond the first deployment. Because that's, I think, where the challenge often is in these cloud applications. And so I would push SAP to say, okay, look beyond the development, because there's so much more which is really involved in that. And not only in terms of what they're doing, because they have their productive environments, but in terms of customers, in terms of developers who are using these platforms, I think that's what's critical.
Right, and you certainly think about this being an issue across the board. That's one of the biggest criticisms I get on Twitter when I bring up microservices, like, well, how are we going to manage a complicated microservices environment? Yeah. And you could say the same about what if we have 10 different IoT projects running. Yep. It's very different than if you have one running. Right. So I think there's that point around, and that's where ServiceNow, I think, has really focused a lot of energy in terms of how to better manage all these services.
Right. Of course, but in terms of the microservices, right now we're still at the beginning phases, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they deal with these applications which are emerging, which are just more complex.
Okay, cool. Well, I hope everyone's enjoying the cell phone conversation behind us. Sorry, folks, we've had a fair amount of background noise at the last part of the shoot, but that was nothing we could do about it. We did our best, but what can you do?
What's the problem with being in a hallway?
Yeah, we had to finish the shoot in a hallway, and hallways are open to disruption. But I think we mostly got it in, though. There were probably a couple points where you guys heard too much background noise, but mostly I think it was okay. So off you go.
Yep. And flying back tonight.
And Tech Ed's in the fall. So actually, the Vegas one's only a few months out. I don't know if you're going to that one. I don't think I'm going to be there, but I have a hunch that I'll see you in Barcelona is the way to look at this one.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, man. Thanks.
Okay, talk to you later.
Later.
Bye.